Well, thank you, Michelle. It's great to be with you. And what I'm going to do is just put these right on the slide. But I'm excited to be with the group today. I'm certainly excited to be with the Wilmington Biz Conference. We've sponsored this now several years. We certainly was looking forward to having a chance to talk face to face. But we've all gotten very accustomed to doing Zoom and being online. So we hope that this will be as interactive as it would be if we were face to face. Just a little bit about myself. Again, I serve as the director over at the Swain Center at UNCW as part of the Cameron School of Business. This was formed as a gift from the Swain family, David and Diane, believing that it's important to provide support both from an economic development perspective as well as from a executive education and leadership perspective to support the great firms here in the region. A little bit about myself. I spent about 14 years in industry, all focused on leadership development. Then I moved into consulting, where I worked for the Center for Creative Leadership and built a whole set of relationships with major clients. And then I've spent now, this is my 8th year in a university setting, and my about 18 months here at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. The agenda we're going to review today is just to reflect back quickly on 2019 when, the economy was strong, the world was much different, and what we were looking at, what were the trends, what we were forecasting, and then very quickly, what has happened in 2020, particularly in the beginning of the year and focused in March, in particular in this region, but worldwide since January, and what have leaders and how have leaders responded to these challenges. So we're going to talk about leaders' response. I'm going to share a little bit of resources that we've built for leaders in the community that you can take advantage of, and then open it up for discussion. So where were we last year? Actually, this time last year is that we have, and some of you I'm sure have attended in the past, but we have a economic outlook conference at the university. This year it will be online, but in previous years we have, anywhere from 300 to 400 folks in the community coming together to really look at what are the economic indicators, both from a global, from a national, from a regional perspective. We have a variety of special speakers coming in to talk about globalization, for example, last year, and then this year for sure we'll be focused on moving forward through this epidemic and the pandemic, and then some things moving forward into 2021. So what were some of the topics that we talked about? Certainly artificial intelligence was top in the discussion around what the impact both artificial intelligence or AI and robotics have on the work environment and what we may be looking at, thinking about. We had a whole discussion about globalization and how that would impact even within the region. What were some of the trends that were going on, and as well as the next gen. We heard a lot of feedback over the last couple of years about the new generation coming into the workforce and how do we leverage them, create an environment for them to contribute. And then certainly big data was a big piece in terms of how do we turn data into business information or help us make some business decisions as we move forward. And then certainly the other pieces were leadership elements that were important as we move forward and lead our businesses. And then of course, COVID-19 hit, and we were all responding as quickly as we could in terms of the environment. Many of us went virtual, working from home. Many of us in the service industries certainly continued to work with the public and work in the outside the home. But many of us, and I'm sure folks on this line are included, is that we got to transition over to this whole new world of work. And this was a prediction that we had planned on, but we believed that this would come 3, 4, maybe even 5 years down the road, really, truly. And that was that people were much more virtual, much more mobile, that individuals could work from all over the world or the globe in terms of contributing, particularly for global organizations, but also in terms of regional or local organizations. Is that there was no longer a need to continue to build the infrastructure to house employees, that most would eventually be moving in a more virtual environment. Well, that happened this year out of necessity, out of response from the governors, and certainly at the national level policy is some guidance in creating a healthy and safe environment for our employees. But as we make the shift, we also as leaders need to consider that the expectations of those employees have shifted, that they have become very independent, they have built up capabilities. Even myself, as I present in a online environment using Zoom. I use Zoom a little bit, last year. I think everyone on the line can say, boy, I'm probably zoomed out. I've got so many meetings that I go to and attend, but it required us to look at tools and technology in a very different way to engage our employees, to make sure that we're communicating in an ongoing basis and engaging them to really help move our organizations forward. So we're gonna, before we sort of jump in, we have this first polling question. And so what we're gonna do is just ask you to just jump in and just respond in terms of, very simply, this is a starting question, is this: to what extent has COVID-19 impacted your business? Little extent, some extent, great extent. So please just respond, click on a dot and just hit submit, and we'll be able to see your responses. You'll see the poll button in the bottom. And Michelle, you just guide me in terms of how that response is coming, and when you feel like we've got a good response, maybe 80% of the folks.
Okay, we're at 11 of 17 at 64%. So it looks like it's kind of done at that.
Let's go. Let's go. That's fantastic. Okay. Can you show the results then?
Yes.
Perfect.
Make sure here.
Excellent. So, and not surprising. I mean, this is to, and there's a range, but in terms of a couple of folks have said, to a little extent, it hasn't really disrupted or impacted our business. And for some, it was even in terms of this is a positive that we would be able to shift. And what many of us have heard this word pivot. It's become a common business reference, but in terms of how it actually impacted. But for the most part, what we're seeing is that most individuals and businesses are saying at least to some extent, so in this case, 36%, and then to a great extent. And so it's usually about that between 30 and 40 and between 50 and 60. But certainly we're all in that position. And this is something that we heard very regularly when we reached out and spoke with leaders in this region. So I'm going to close this, Michelle, if that's okay with you. Perfect. Okay. So what did we do? The first thing right away, and many of you I know have done, is that we reached out to our clients, engaged with what was going on with them, tried to be, listen. That was our big element. Those first 2 to 4 weeks is just to, get in touch, talk with, ask a couple of questions. And then we began to survey and get, more sophisticated. Very short. Individuals' attention span was very short. So what were those big things that were happening? So the first, and we've published inside article under my name for the university, but in terms of this whole notion of moving from crisis to opportunity. And we talked about these three phases. And why I wanted to share this with you is that each one is really distinct from the others, and that you'll probably recognize some elements of each that you're dealing with across at the same time. But for the most part, we know that in order for us to really move our business forward as a key leader and a leader of the community, that we really need to pay attention to each of these phases and how do we move forward to the next. And this wasn't something that we made up. It was something that the leaders told us. We talked to over 100 key leaders in the community. And so let's start with this whole notion of respond in terms of respond to the disruption, trying to identify how did my, not only my industry, but the sector within the industry. I was talking with Dr. Adam Jones, our regional economist and department chair over at the university's Cameron School of Business. And he said, when we look at these data, and in the past, we often looked at industry data, but really what we're trying to see or starting to see is that these disruptions went even further down in terms of different sectors within an industry experienced the pandemic in a different way. So really to understand what those disruptions were throughout not only your staff, but also your whole supply chain in terms of how, what disruptions occurred and how do you work through that or work around that. And so we heard that a lot. The second is similar to what we did is to listen to our clients or our customers. People really took a lot of time to reach out to say, hey, what were your common themes? We heard one of our key, very successful organizations in the area began to pivot in terms of hearing different elements that they were not having access to the personal protective equipment, for example. And so they pivoted or shifted and started to produce and distribute PPEs to their 30,000 clients across the country. And what that did was be able to fill a gap for a short period of time. So how do we listen to our clients? How do we respond to that and be able to shift so that we're leveraging our own capabilities? I do know that last month was a record residency in our hotels. And in our rentals. And so that surprised some of us, but really, it was a bent up demand for people who wanting to come into or come close to the ocean. And so we started to see this uptick again. And so we all know that the beginning of, we start to see that where the leaks are and saying, how do I respond to that? How do we start to look at it? So this was one of the fundamental elements that people were saying is that we need to go back and really understand what's working well and what's not. So those from our perspective was really how individuals first responded to the pandemic. So we're talking about March, April, May, even into June in some cases, and some are still, having elements of that right now. And we know that it's okay. The second piece is they started to move into in early summer, late spring, summer, is that now how do we begin to adapt? How do we begin to look at reality, look at the current conditions, and begin to adapt and be able to respond, to build some capability within our organization and really get back to business? And so one is this whole notion of reboarding. We often heard onboarding. Well, this is a common phrase now, is reboarding. How do we really bring our employees back or re-engage our employees in a different way, and how to make sure that they are in a safe and healthy work environment. So in terms of this whole notion of social distancing, some protocols that organizations have put in place, so that individuals feel that they are safe when they come into the work environment. And what we heard is that many of our employers, and I know this happened at UNCW, is that notion of flexibility, of really looking at how do we support our employees, engage them, how do we provide them with the tools and technology so that they can continue at a very high level of contribution. And certainly that occurred not only with our staff, but our faculty and students as well. Then the notion, and this started to pull together, is looking at our vision as an organization. And individuals weren't saying that we were doing a total redo or revamp, but really just looking at what are some of those elements of our vision that we might need to recheck, reconfirm, maybe adjust a little bit. But we knew that as the organization started to shift, and I know within the Swain Center, we had to make some shifts in terms of what the marketplace was telling us and how do we be more responsive to the needs of our regional leaders. That was starting to change a little bit. And so how do we look at that vision and begin to recommunicate or adjust that vision for our staffs and organizations and our customers and suppliers? And then how do we begin to communicate that more broadly? You'll hear this notion about rapid realignment, but in terms of around that vision, how do we begin to align our people, our process, our systems, our technology, all around that vision? And so we'll hear this notion, as a matter of fact, we have a session next week that we're going to share at MedWeek, the Minority Enterprise Development Week, around this whole notion of rapid realignment. But what are some techniques that we make sure that it's one thing to talk about vision, but then how do we bring together and align all of our resources around that adjusted vision? I don't want to call it a new vision, but adjusted vision. And then a discussion that we had a few weeks ago, actually it was about a month ago now, we did an online session about emerging markets and how to look at new markets that are coming on as a result of this, or perhaps they've been accelerated in terms of the marketplace. And one of them, very exciting for this region, is certainly the blue economy. So we had Diane Durance, our director of the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, really talk about what that blue economy looks like and the impact that it has on our region and the growth that we see as an opportunity. She used some number, about 40% of jobs in this region are connected to that blue economy. And so we're pretty close to the top. I believe the Boston area is like #1 in the country in terms of looking at the blue economy and leveraging that. But Wilmington in our region is really positioned to be a strong leader in the country. So what can we learn from these other mega centers, and how do we bring that here, and how do we create new opportunities for our employers, our organizations, as well as the folks who live in the area, and how do we bring folks into the region? And then in terms of investment, so we talked about freeing up cash, we talked about looking at your vision, we talked about looking at your business operations. How do you begin to prioritize and invest in terms of wisely? And not only invest, but how do we hedge our bets? So business leaders talked about, how do we assess not only when we're successful in a new enterprise or if we pivot to a new product line, which was the example that we used with PPEs, is that how do we also create a exit strategy if this doesn't work out, it doesn't match our capabilities or our key strategic drivers for our organization, and then when do we make that decision? And so what leaders were sharing with us is that we need to make those decisions probably a little sooner than we've had in the past. Give it enough time, but not too much, because if it's not the right investment, we need to make some shifts. So as we free up a little bit of cash in our organization, we begin to hedge out, look at the data, look at what our customers and our suppliers are telling us, and then to be able to hedge our bets a little bit in terms of where there's new opportunities, how do we leverage that, perhaps new industries like the blue economy, how do we hedge our bets, how do we move into those markets if we haven't already. And then lastly, there's this notion of, and please be patient with me, I know I've been talking a lot through this, but I just wanted to lay out these 3 different phases around respond, adapt, and create. And by the way, I'm going to share my notes on these slides as well, so you'll have them. Don't worry about having to write it down. We're being recorded, but I'm also going to share my slides But as we look at in terms of creating this new opportunity, new market for us. So in terms of how did we respond, then how did we adapt within our organization, and now how our organization is looking at this from a new, are there new opportunities for us, and how do we move this forward? So in terms of this whole notion of the new way of work, I referenced it earlier, but that our employee population, the resources that are available to us, the world is our oyster. Let me repeat that. In terms of there are many different now resources that are available that may not have been available to us in the past. So leveraging technology, leveraging key talent, that maybe it's not a requirement to have them move here right away. And so how do we engage them? There are a number of folks that are out of work as a result of the pandemic and are very talented and looking for new opportunities. Perhaps they're not looking for full-time work. They're looking for this buffer workforce that can take a temporary assignment or a consulting assignment for a couple of years and then move on. So how do we engage this new workforce? So very important is that it's a different world. It's a different world from what we were even a year ago. So how do we leverage that and get some good advice on that? Second is this whole notion of the analytics. Again, I can't begin to reinforce that. We get a call at least once a week, if not twice a week, about help us think through the data that we have. How do we work through that? And we have some very talented faculty in the business school that have been incredible resources and assets to our community of helping organizations look through this and really identify where there's some opportunities. Third, in terms of broader thinking, right? So many of us, and if we're entrepreneurs and have built our business and are moving forward, we're very focused in terms of where the niche value is and how do we create value and how do we move that forward as an organization. So it's tough now as we start to look at this new world, is that how do we think a little bit more broader beyond our the limits that we have created for our own successes, and say, are there some connections? Are there other things that we can bring in? Again, it's not everywhere, but how do we do it selectively? How do we do it so that we increase our capabilities and the likelihood that we'll be successful in there? And then this notion of resilience in terms of how do I become more resilient? How do I bounce back from these things? I'm not sure about you, but there was a period of time that I was probably working 7 days a week, might have been about a 6-week period. And I started in the morning on a Zoom call. I finished at nighttime on the Zoom call. My wonderful wife of 34 years would knock on my office door and say, hey, Rich, let's have dinner. Let's have some time together. And so how do we begin to start stepping back and saying, okay, how do I begin to prioritize as a leader? What are those things that I'm getting involved with? And how do I create the greatest value? And are there other people within my organization that I can leverage, that I can bring forward, that I can begin to delegate some things or build their capabilities so that they can expand their role and contribute in a much broader way? So we call this broader thinking. And so how do we think a little bit more broader? We've been so focused in an area, and certainly over the last 6-7 months, we've been very focused. But then how do we step back and think in a broader way? What is those big questions that we can ask and reach out and get some advice? Maybe a few folks who maybe are 2 steps ahead of us that can say, hey, how did your organization do it? What are some things? And certainly it may not be a competitive situation, but a good friend, someone, maybe an alumni, or a relationship that you have that, that have been mentors to you in the past. We forget that we have this huge network of advisors that we can tap into. So how do we do that and have them help us think broader about our business? And I think that's going to be important. And I also think it's going to help us in terms of being resilient and being able to be more agile when something comes around the corner, and it will. I think this surprised many of us. This was beyond many of our thinking about what could happen to our business, to our economy, but it is the reality. And so we do believe that this is a place where we're going to be moving into. And so how do we begin to adjust, adapt, be more agile? Because when the next phase, and I'm not saying it's a pandemic, I don't even want to broach that, but in terms of that next thing, I'm doing a lot of work at the hospital, and certainly the what's coming up in the fall is you know, getting the I'm trying to think but in terms of the flu, the fall season is a very tough season for them. So here they've been on the front line, and it's just incredible stories I can't even begin to share with you. I know many of you have friends or family or good colleagues who work over at the hospital. But I mean, these are the folks that have been on the front line providing the support and service. And so they're now going into one of their busiest times of the year. So sort of a double opportunity is that still continuing to manage the pandemic, understanding that the flu season is upon us, and then that could increase some of the positive tests in terms of those who are diagnosed with COVID-19. So how do we begin to support and create some resilience in that environment, just like it is within our organization, our industry or sector, is that we're not immune to it. So that I know that, and I'm sure many of you have had this experience, is that folks pick up the flu. I mean, it's a very common thing. So that's going to create an additional challenge for us. And there may be something else that comes in 2021 that we're not even thinking about. So how do we begin to build that capability, knowing that it might be challenging, but what are some resources that are available to us? So what we hear our leaders saying is that for us to create and move even further, is that here's some things that you know, we're looking at. So there's this whole notion of respond, this whole notion of adapt, and this whole notion of create. And each one is a specific phase that you can't really go to the next if you haven't attended to at least a good portion of the ones previous. So what I'm going to share with the group after this session is that my notes, right? So here are the talking points for each of moving from respond to adapt to create. And so again, you didn't have to, you know, feverishly write some notes, but just hopefully a couple of things that you took away from here. So as we move forward, I thought what we could do is to engage the group in some polling questions. And so which phase, very simply in terms of which phase of resiliency best describes your organization, where your business is now. So are you in the response phase? And the majority of your effort is to be able to respond to what's in front of you and what was the impact of the pandemic. Are you beginning to adapt and adjust and inviting your workforce and adapting the way you do your work a little bit different, or you're engaging your customers or your clients? And then are there folks who are starting to say, hey, how do we create new opportunities for us? How do we take this challenge and turn it into some, you know, one or two things that we can do that can differentiate us, that we're positioned well for, and that we can begin to provide some added services. You know, we've heard the stories about all the delivery services around food and around groceries and around, you know, even restaurants who are now providing, you know, meats and fish and fresh, you know, services that may not even be cooked, you know. So there's, but how do we deliver that and engage that for folks? Because there's a high demand for it. Even though people may not be ready to go right back into the restaurants. I know a lot of us have gone outside to dine, but many of us have not. So how do we begin to go through that? So here, as we're hearing this in terms of the respond and adapt and create. So this surprises me a little bit. We usually see a further distribution, but I think this is very hopeful in terms of what I'm hearing is that from this is that about a half of us on the group are saying that, hey, I'm starting to adapt, we're starting to move forward, we're starting to engage. And over half are saying, hey, now how do we look forward, and how do we move this forward? So fantastic, Michelle. Thank you for collecting that. I think that's fantastic. I'd also like to just take a moment if there are any questions, Michelle, that we might want to attend to before we jump into the next element of this. Are there some questions that are
not as of right now? You probably are answering everybody's question with all your thorough information, so thank you.
Please, you're so kind. I don't pretend to be, the #1 business leader. I really am not. But what I do have is a lot of information that I've engaged and talked with a number of leaders. Some of them are probably on this phone today. But in terms of just trying to glean from those discussions on what's working and maybe what's not. So thank you, Michelle. Just keep an eye on if there is some opportunities to go through. So I will share in terms of how we responded. So we're, a microcosm, but a small business that we provide services to the community and also back to the university, certainly creating connections, supporting some of our great faculty and helping identify some areas for research and pushing some of the new thoughts into the work environment. But we certainly, I shared this earlier, is that we first and foremost reached out to our clients. I mean, that first month was really a connection or reconnection and saying, hey, what's going on? Well, how can we support? What are some things? And what we found during those discussions is that people did not have a lot of time to talk about the weather or talk about, so we were very focused. We were very focused on those discussions. And then if they wanted to talk afterwards, we certainly opened that up. But we really tried to do that quickly and engage them and begin to make it valuable. And then as a executive education center and focused also on economic development, is that we began to convert all of our services, at least those that were the most popular programs like the business analytics or like leading major projects or strategic projects within your organization with project management. We began to convert those to online. And so not only our open enrollment programs, but our clients were saying, hey, from our customized solutions, let's keep this going. We can reach a larger audience. And so can we convert our custom programs for our leaders and our staff? So we did that as well. But that was a big change. So we brought in some folks to help us do that, help us think that through, because about 70% of our work prior to this was face-to-face. And so we flipped that, and now, about 90% is online, and we still do some face-to-face. And of that 90%, we also do some executive coaching and development of folks. So it's more of a personalized relationship as well. We were very excited. People were saying, hey, what would be really valuable for me is if you can identify that business leaders said were really important. Both Lori and Lynn at Harris Weitzel Consulting helped us put together a whole series of 5-minute videos. We call it Excellence in Leadership. And they're complimentary. We posted them on our websites, not only for the Swain Center, but also at Forte and Harris Weitzel. We engaged the Leaders Council. Some of you know them, but in terms of some global perspective and some global information. And then we had a great support with Cassian Films in terms of actually producing in a very professional way these videos. So again, very quick, very responsive, but very professionally done. And we're just so pleased, with business. So it's one thing to have rapid realignment, for example, but how do I do that within my organization? What are some things? So we did offer executive coaching. We're still doing it in terms of pro bono executive coaching. So what does that mean? At least the first session that we're doing it with no charge for pro bono for key leaders that are trying to move their organizations forward. And the reason why we're committed to this, and this is part of UNCW's mission, is that your success is our success. Right? So that we want to do everything that we can do. We want to bring the resources to bear to help you be successful and to make this and move this forward. So one of the ways is we did it with this executive coaching. And I know Lori and Lynn and Hoop are doing these as well with individuals. But we made that decision and said, look, for at least to get them started. And then if they want to continue to do some executive coaching, then we do it in a slightly reduced way. But that was very important, and leaders said that was important. And then we offered these, series of, I don't want to call them a series, but online executive sessions, so that we got on Facebook. We went over to the with Natalie English and her team over at the Wilmington Chamber of Commerce. And we did a Facebook online session. We did it with several alumni. We did it with several key media outlets across the region. But what we did was we just identified, what are those key topics? So one of them was emerging markets. I use that as an example with the blue economy. But we talked about these different things, about business resiliency and how to keep your business as resilient as possible as you move forward. So we did that, and we made that offer. And so we did it very quickly. It was challenging, but what we did was we brought in the right partners to help us do that, and the response was very positive. But again, it's thinking about your core business and how do we adapt or adjust, stay true to your capabilities, your strengths, where the value that you bring in your market, but really begin to say, how do we begin to tweak that? Perhaps the way we deliver or the way we may offer, or perhaps there's some additional products or services that we can extend in our portfolio that can complement, where we bring value, but also respond to the current needs of our customers. So we did that just along with, most of you on this call, and we're excited about as we move forward. But I'll tell you, like many of you, and we've heard, is that back in March and April, it was kind of a scary time in terms of what does this mean? How do we move this forward? It's one thing to be offering this, but will people take us up on it? And the good news is that people did. They said, we need this. It's packaged in the right way. It's short, sweet. So again, but the most important thing is we wanted to support this region's business leaders, and however way we could do that, we wanted to do that. So let me take a step back. Again, Michelle, I wanted to check if there are any questions that came up. We'll have a chance to do a quick chat in the chat box. But are there any others that may have dropped in so far?
No, we have a gratitude response from Harris Whitesell Consulting, and then Matt sent the link for the Executive and Leadership Series videos.
Oh, fantastic. So that'll be available for folks. Fantastic. So I'm sure, I'm not sure if it was Lori or Len, but thank you. You're amazing. And Hoop, I can't say enough about folks, and certainly with Cassian Films, I can't say enough. But let's talk about, and let's do a chat, shall we, just a quick chat for folks. But in terms of focusing, what are you most focused on today? If you wake up in the morning, or if you're focused and saying, how do I move my organization, my business forward? What's that one thing that you're focused on? So just, take a moment, put it in the chat room. This gives us a chance to, just respond and look at it. But I think this is going to be really important. So just take a moment. Client success. Again, just point and click on chat and say, to either the panelists or to all is fine, just to, identify. Well, I'll share a couple that I've heard, right, in terms of how do we adapt and add additional services. So we had a um, very good friend stay down by the beach. So hard to say. I'm hearing. I feel like these changes. Amen. I feel like these changes day to day. I'm with you, Liz. Today I'm focused on how to bring back face-to-face programming, which is not easy, right? But in terms of how do we engage folks in a face-to-face way, we are going to be hosting next week our executive and professional MBA residency program on the weekend. And so we have a large group. About half are going to be coming in face-to-face and half will be continuing online. They have been participating in the MBA programs face-to-face, so this is not a major change, but it is a shift. And so we're being very thoughtful about how do we engage our students, providing a safe environment for them. Certainly the speakers that we're bringing in what other services that we can offer and support while they're staying with us as our guests. So again, these are things that individuals, step back and saying, hey, let's challenge, what we've done in the past. How do we bring it to another level? How do we make these kinds of things that we did in volume more focused and more high value? And the family, by the way, said, I'm happy to spend more, to make sure that this is, a good experience for my family. And so how do we do that? Perhaps how do we support our employees? We're hearing a lot about, hey, my family members, my children are at home. I know we're going to go back into a new schedule with New Hanover schools. But in terms support them in other ways. So we bring other services in. Why don't we jump to the next start taking? What are some actions that, boy, if I could